Is there possibly a positive way through the middle of all of this? And I say this in the context of what Ian Duncan Smith MP, remember former Conservative Party leader, Ian Duncan Smith this morning in the Express has written a piece. And what he said basically is the Prime Minister should ditch her plan, namely the Chequers proposals, unite the country and propose a new free trade deal in Salzburg. So Salzburg this week, there is an informal get-together of the heads of all the European Union countries. And really what Duncan Smith is saying is she's got to say, look, Chequers is over. We're going to make a fresh start on all of this. And this indeed is what the Jacob Rees-Moggs and others have been urging her. We're going to make a fresh start on all of this. Let's go for a free trade deal. Let me ask you folks, you're out there, you're a Remainer. You were a Remainer. You're a Leaver, or you were a Leaver. Would a simple free trade deal with the European Union unite the country? Now, what does that mean? Well, it would mean that on goods, for certain, there would be no tariffs. Of course, we'd have to respect each other's standards, but we'd get round all the nonsense of free movement because, a Canada-style trade deal and we're all calling it Canada Plus because you add the bit on, which is there'll be a deal on services too. You wouldn't have the problem of free movement. You wouldn't have the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice, and we'd be out of everything. I think the biggest problem here is, as a country, we've spent 30 or 40 years trying to opt out of bits of the European Union, and now Mrs. May, since her Florence speech, wants to opt back into bits of the European Union, despite the fact that actually we're leaving. So just a good, simple, clean break and a free trade deal without the added politics. Would that, in your opinion, folks, unite the country? Tell me, does a free trade deal unite Britain? Call 0345 60 60 973. Or am I living in fantasy land? Is it impossible to unite these different political philosophies in this country? If that's how you feel, text to 84850. And please, any other suggestions you've got, how we might be able to unite people, then tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC, and similarly, you can comment on Facebook too. Now, Ian Duncan Smith has written this, and I was over this week in Strasbourg for a few days, and I was actually quite struck that Jean-Claude Juncker, in his State of the Union speech, I thought his attitude towards Brexit was a lot more positive than I'd heard it before. He was saying, there's a trade deal to be done. And isn't it funny? I mean, ever since 2001, I sat with Neil Kinnock on the Today programme doing a head-to-head in 2001, and Kinnock said, if what Nigel wants is to leave the European Union and just have a trade deal, that would be fine with the European Union, but in his view, a terrible political loss. And frankly, when I think back to the 25 years I've been involved in all of this, from even before UKIP was actually set up as a party, I mean, all I've always said is I want free trade and friendship with our European neighbours, not political linkage. And I now reckon there's an appetite in Brussels for this. Even Dominic Raab, the Brexit secretary, actually being quite bullish about things. He had an extended phone call on Friday with Monsieur Barnier. And Raab is saying that he's optimistic that within 6 to 8 weeks something can be sorted out. Barnier, a little more cautious, but even he said it'd been a useful dialogue. There are still substantive differences, Irish border, protections for regional specialities on foods, but it does feel, though, we are getting closer. And I also think that German industry will not want the UK to leave and for there to be a tariff regime in this country against their motor cars. Remember, they sell us more than we sell them. Can we unite the country around something? And you know what? If the Prime Minister could unite the country, suddenly all those difficulties with parliamentary arithmetic in Westminster would get easier because, hey, that's the way that it works. I'm trying to be positive, folks. Is there a way forwards? David is a new caller from Toddington in Bedfordshire. Good morning, David.
Good morning, Nigel.
Right, so is there? I mean, is it impossible to unite the country around the Brexit process, David, or is a simple free trade deal, sort of Canada Plus deal, is that the way to do it?
I don't think it's going to work, Nigel. Given the negotiations we've had so far,
right?
Unless we get somebody other than Theresa May, I don't have faith that we're going to be able to do any deal with the European Union.
Well, I mean, she could. I mean, let's suppose the European Union were to agree to her Chequers plan. Now, if that was the case, and she then comes back to the House of Commons, we now know from what Emily Thornberry said on Friday that Labour will simply vote against. Do you know why, David? Because they want a general election, and they see political advantage. Would the prospect of the government losing and an impending general election, or, God forbid, maybe her only other way out would be to offer a second referendum, would that make Jacob Rees-Mogg and others come into line and do the bidding of the party, or would they continue to oppose Chequers on principle? And my guess, David, and you know, those of us old enough to remember Maastricht saw all these debates before, but my guess is if she sticks to Chequers, not only will she be in major trouble and be ousted as Tory leader, but we may well finish up with a general election or even a second referendum.
I think it's a good chance that we will end up with a second referendum or a general election. I think it's going to be disastrous if we have Corbyn in power. But I don't see any strength in anybody in the Tory party to stand up to her.
But it's just, you know, in terms of a policy solution, David, would you agree that a Canada Plus style deal, we go and make a big offer to the EU and say, right, let's do this, guys, let's crack on. Do you know what, David? I think they'd say yes.
If they said yes, we would have to have somebody strong from the UK put in our argument. Are we going to get somebody strong? Are we going to get you, Nigel?
Oh, well, I don't think the Conservative Party are going to have me, David. They will always see me as an outsider, and I haven't got a problem with that. David, I get the point. It's not easy. Thank you. We're going to go to Westerham in Kent and speak to Teresa, a new caller to this show. Good morning.
Hello, Nigel. How are you?
I am well. Is it possible, Teresa, that we could unite people around the concept of a free trade deal? We would, knock into a hat the arguments about it being damaging for exports because tariffs wouldn't be there, and we'd also satisfy the leavers because we wouldn't have free movement of people or any say of the European Court. I mean, surely it could work.
I think it should be a clear break away.
Yeah.
Because to be quite honest, I really, Theresa May, there is no way that she really wants to move away in any shape or form away from the European Union, and we all know what they're made up of.
But I mean, the break, Teresa. I want a completely clear break politically. Yeah. In terms of decision making.
Yeah.
But I'm more than happy for us to have great relations with our European neighbours in terms of trade and reciprocity of students and all of those things. I mean,
and what about immigration?
Well, of course. I mean, surely everybody must recognise that the issue that won the referendum for the Leave side was the desire to stop free movement. And if you have a simple free trade deal, I mean, Canada signed this deal with the European Union. There is absolutely no provision within there for workers or people to freely move from the EU to Canada or vice versa. So I think this would bring people together.
And is Canada paying a lot of money into the EU?
Nothing. Canada pay no money. Canada don't have free movement. Canada do not have the oversight of the European Court. They just have, on goods, a tariff-free basis on which they can buy and sell stuff from each other. It kind of makes sense, doesn't it, really?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But I don't really think it would be like that. I think Europe is out to get the UK.
Right.
I think that somehow with Merkel, the type she is, it's like going back a long way. She's still got, well, who knows what story she was told when she was young. about the UK, the English, yeah? And I still think it's still there.
Right. You may be right. Teresa
I don't care if it's being honest. I just think that the whole of Brussels are a load of absolute...
It's Sunday morning, Teresa.
I know. I know. But to me, no. I would trust what you say.
Okay, well,
because you're the only one that I do trust. You and our Jacob too.
Well, I want nothing to do with this political project whatsoever. I don't want to opt back in, as the Prime Minister does, to any of it. But when it comes to trade and friendship, Teresa, we should be very happy with that. Thank you very much indeed for your call. It's there. This free trade deal is possible. Giscard d'Estaing told me 10 years ago. Oh, but if you'll be relegated, Nigel. You'll just have a free trade deal. You'll miss out on the political opportunities offered by Europe. Good. I don't want any of them. I never ever did. Let's be relegated. Let's not be part of this massive edifice, this new European state. Let's just have a trade deal. Here we are, positive suggestion on Twitter. It is possible to unite both Leavers and Remainers simply by talking about Tony Blair. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC, and it's 11:15. Can we unite Leavers and Remainers? Can we have a more positive discourse about Brexit? I think we can. I think the answer is a simple free trade deal with Europe. I think that would bring most of us together. After all, a third of those, at least, who voted Remain respect the result of the referendum. I mean, Jeffrey Archer today being interviewed in the Sunday Telegraph. Jeffrey saying, I voted Remain, but hey, you know what? I lost. Let's get on with it. This attitude, let's get on with it. And all right, you've got your Sadiq Khans and Vince Cables and the others who are fanatics for the European project, but most people just want to get on with life, want Brexit put behind us and the country to move on. So I think we can. Now, one or two of you this morning have mentioned history. We've been right back to English Civil War and all the rest of it. Just a quick thought. Yesterday, 15th of September, was Battle of Britain Day. It's the day that we commemorate in 1940 when famously Churchill went to the bunker in the west of London. There were two massive German bombing raids taking place over the capital, and Churchill asked the question, what do we have in reserve? And the answer is nothing, Prime Minister. And at that moment, every single fighter plane the Royal Air Force had was up in the sky at that moment in time. Quite extraordinary thing, and a big part of our history. There's a service going on right now in Westminster Cathedral, and yesterday, down on the Thames, on the embankment, there is the Battle of Britain Memorial. And if you're in London, it's worth going and having a look at it. And every year, veterans from the battle gather there. And yesterday, there was only one veteran there, Paul Farnes. He's 100. He shot down 8 German aircraft during the Battle of Britain. He damaged a further 11. And kind of that little bit of history is just slipping over the edge. There's almost, as he says, I'm not the only one alive, but I'm almost the only one alive. And all that upsets me on this, really, because you can't stop time moving on, is that I did get a petition together, which I put into government about 18 months ago, saying, why didn't we just honour the last of the few in some way, whether that would be a knighthood or, I don't know, a CBE or whatever it would be. And being the country that we are, we decided to do absolutely nothing. Hey, there we are. So can this country be united? When we leave the EU and the horses of the apocalypse do not come, most Remainers will deny ever voting Remain, and that will reunite Britain, says Marty on Twitter. Well, you may be right. But because these constant, as I say, dark threats, and I so well remember, back in 2000, Lord Levine, the Lord Mayor of the City of London, basically saying, if we don't join the Euro, the city, it's over, it's finished. Britain's biggest industry will be gone. And the opposite happened, it grew. And in fact, we finished up transacting more bargains, more trades in euros in London than the whole of the rest of the European capitals put together. It's what we do. We've been a trading, merchanting nation. We're actually really rather good at it. VJ is a new caller from Totteridge. Good morning to you, VJ.
Hi, morning, Nigel. I'm not a leaver or a remainer. I'm watching this from a safe distance, and I'm quite
distance.
Intrigued by the way a nation can torture its soul like this for no reason.
VJ, tell me, given the passion of this debate, where does one go to be?
I watched it very, very closely, right? Up until Ian Duncan Smith's article that you mentioned now, right? I'm going to point out to one serious flaw, and I don't have any particular side to take here. You talked about Ian Duncan Smith talking about a free trade deal. Let's go back, have a free trade deal with Europe, just like Canada, and then add services onto it, and perfect solution. Unites everyone, right?
Yes.
The one serious flaw in that argument, and that also explains why people who most often call you a 60 years plus, is the fact that you think, and most leavers think, and even remainers think, that you're entitled for our children and our grandchildren to live, work, play, and get themselves educated in, France, Spain, Netherlands, Italy, Austria, wherever, right? And that's not true. If you go away, a Canada-style deal is an arm's length deal. That entire privilege is lost. And why do you think that matters to nothing?
Well, VJ, okay, you raised the issue of healthcare, all right?
Not just healthcare, no. Living there, being able to work there, being able to study there, and being able to enjoy a continent of 600 million people. Why do you think the entire...
But VJ, hang on a second. I mean, we can go and study in America. We can go and work in America. We can study in Australia. I mean, it's not terribly difficult.
It costs about $200,000 to get grad education in America. So let's not give that kind of spin. We have to understand, right? You have to say the truth to the people.
Well, you might get a scholarship to America. You might. The point I'm making is, okay, you're arguing.
Free trade deal is an arm's length deal. Don't get anything more than that.
But isn't that what we voted for? Wouldn't that be within the spirit of Brexit?
The ones who voted for were short-sighted enough, right? They didn't care about the 20-year-olds. Get the 16-year-old and 18-year-old, and they'll tell you how much this is valued to them. But the 60-year-old doesn't care about the need to go.
But you talk to me, VJ, about 20-year-olds, right? I mean, how many 20-year-olds go on a gap year to Frankfurt? Like none, because they go and walk in the Andes, or they go to the Far East, or they. I mean, the world, VJ, has become a very much smaller place, and I think for my parents' generation, for my parents' generation, Europe may have looked to be quite big and exciting back in the 70s. I mean, it's now just...
It is.
It's
Berlin
just the backyard, isn't it?
Amsterdam is more dynamic than before. Paris is more dynamic. Unless you physically separate these islands from that continent, from the White Cliffs of Dover, physically all the leavers get together, remainers get together, the ones who don't value this, the geographical closeness, you can't avoid it. You're just stuck by it.
Well, VJ, I am perfect. Look, I said this earlier on, and I'll stick with it. I'm perfectly happy with reciprocity. All right? I'm perfectly happy that our students can go to Amsterdam and Dutch students can come here. I'm happy with reciprocity, provided that it's fair. I'm not happy with reciprocity, for example, on healthcare, when we pick up an enormous burden, far more than goes the other way.
So you agree that it's better to have a similar arrangement and have a comprehensive immigration, the thorny issue of immigration addressed in a comprehensive manner. That's basically what
this is about. I mean, VJ, what I as a lifelong committed leaver want is to be outside the political structures of the European Union, but I am perfectly happy as a neighbour living almost living in the same street. There is a little bit of water between us, but almost living in the same street. I'm perfectly happy for us to have as good a neighbourly relations with our European neighbours as we possibly can. And I think a free trade deal, I do accept your point that it's at arm's length, but at least a free trade deal would get our relationship onto a positive start.
Yeah. No, I understand. So, we can't demonize or, yes, the European parliamentarians are bureaucratic, they are inflexible, but there's no point demonizing and straining relationship just because someone has a political point to make, or Boris Johnson finds that route to number 10. His entire life and convictions could be about Remain, but he has changed it because he finds a way there, or Jacob Rees-Mogg has found a passion, or you have something to do. It shouldn't be for those reasons. It should actually be for very logical, and it should be future-proof. You agree, right?
Yeah, Vijay, I think in a sense, you're arguing a very positive tone. And Vijay, just one last point to you: people like me who feel so strongly about this, we love Europe. All right, we love Europe. We love the different countries, the different cultures, the different wines, the different cheeses, the different peoples. What we absolutely despise is the unelected European Commission having the power that it does. Vijay, I'm going to move on. I thank you for your call. Another new caller is Nick, who's calling from Worthing in Sussex. Good morning, Nick.
Good morning, Nigel. Nice to speak to you.
Good to speak to you. So, am I, whistling in the wind, believing that actually we can bring people together?
Well, I think we could if we had some leadership. Leadership is the key.
Yes.
And let's face it, our current leader is probably mediocre in that department, with all due respect to her. And she's tasked with taking us out of the European Union, and at heart she's a Remainer. And then the irony is, if the Labour Party make it their policy to hold a second referendum, we could end up with a situation where their leader might be tasked with keeping us in, and yet he's a Remainer.
Or a leaver. Yeah, I know, but then, Corbyn may be prepared to compromise his principle on that if he thinks he might get a shot at being Prime Minister, mightn't he?
Well, he might, but that's the problem, isn't it? At heart, leadership requires belief in what you're trying to achieve.
Leadership, Nick, real leadership is about conviction and courage, and it's about often standing up, isn't it? And not having majority support for a position, but explaining to the nation why you've got this position and inviting them to come with you. That's what real leadership is. And I have to say, we have seen it. I mean, whether you like his politics or not, Tony Blair in many ways was a leader. He would stand up, make an argument, and go with it. Margaret Thatcher was a leader. She'd stand up, make an argument, go with it. There are precious few people like that around today.
There are, unfortunately. I don't think the calibre exists anymore. I think politicians are generally too worried about their short-term positions.
Is it too much about careerism, Nick, do you think?
It is exactly that.
Yeah,
exactly that.
Yeah, I fear. Well, look, I do actually rather agree with you. I think this could be done, but for Mrs May to do this and pull this off, she would have to admit that Chequers was a disaster and kind of start again, and I just don't see her doing it. Nick, I thank you for your call. Thank you for mentioning Battle of Britain Day. Mum is 96 in October, was a WAF wireless operator, says Sandy in Westcliff. Good. Well, if I've made her morning, I'm very, very pleased about that. You're listening to a Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's 11:30, and all this acrimony, division, backbiting, people changing their minds, increased cynicism. That's what we get from Brexit, but surely there's got to be a way through. Surely we accept the result of the referendum, we make Brexit a success, and we start to bring the country together. And if the Prime Minister could do that, she'd suddenly find the numbers in Parliament would be far less of a problem than they are right at this moment in time. Ian Duncan Smith talks here about going for a free trade deal and starting that process in Salzburg this week when the EU leaders meet pretty informally, and I think he's absolutely 100% right and on the money. That, I think, would be a very, very good start. I say again, it's political structures that I want us to leave. Very happy to be good next door neighbours and friends with the rest of Europe. Want to be. Let's go to Sam, who's a new caller from Wimbledon. Good morning, Sam.
Morning, Nigel. How are you?
I am well. How do we unite the country, Sam?
Well, first off, the leaders, when you got people who call themselves leaders like Jacob Rees-Mogg, who totally double standard, where he's moving his business into Europe to make sure he's in Europe when we come out. If you lead by example, you want to come out. Yourself, I think you're still an MEP. Is that correct?
It is.
Right. So why don't you leave your position in Europe, come out, lead by example. if we got leaders who are saying, yes, we want to do this, we're passionate about what we're doing, show us some leadership.
Okay.
Come out of Europe.
Okay. Well, Sam. Firstly, on Jacob, I mean, he runs an investment company, and he's criticised for buying shares in Vietnam or whatever it is. So I'm just not going to get involved into a complex business argument with Jacob. As far as I'm concerned, well, of course, Sam, 19 years ago,
he recently moved a part of the business into Europe. Since Brexit.
if you're
and that's securing his position in Europe. When you come out,
if you're running a global investment company, for all I know, he's got offices all over the world. I don't know. I'm not going to comment on that. But as far as I'm concerned, well, a lot of people said to me 19 years ago, "Why on earth are you here? And if you don't believe in the European project, why have you taken up your position?" And this was a thought-through strategy that we would go there, and we would use our experience to bring the European institutions, the Parliament in particular, to a broader audience. And I think I've been quite successful with that. If I thought, Sam, going over there tomorrow and collecting my cards and walking out would help, I'd be only too happy to do so. I have to say, going back and
but you keep saying you don't agree with the you like Europe, but it's the political part of Europe that you want to leave.
Yes,
but you're still a part of it.
Well, I am still a part of it, Sam, and I still have a voice.
So why don't you leave? That's my question to you. Why don't you leave? Because
I cannot wait not to be an MEP. I've done my time. The journey back and forth to Strasbourg is once a month is absolute murder. But Sam, if I thought walking out tomorrow would help, I would. I promise you. But at the moment, I'm still a group leader. I've still got seat number 20. Mr. Juncker's got seat number 21, and I'm going to be there until we leave. And when we do leave, I'll walk out, Sam, and I will have been the turkey that voted for Christmas. Now, you'll notice again today on the news, weather is really, really dominant. Not British weather, but global weather. Hong Kong and southern China facing a severe test from Typhoon Mangkhut. And people are being told there are possible disasters to come. So that is a typhoon. US President Donald Trump has declared a disaster in North Carolina, where a storm has killed 11 people amid warnings that the worst is yet to come. Storm Florence is projected to bring catastrophic flooding. So I get a bit confused. I don't know about you folks. Maybe it's just me being stupid. But I'm not sure I understand the difference between hurricanes, typhoons, cyclones. They're hurricanes in America, but there's a different word whenever it's in the Far East. Listen, I want to learn more. I'm going to go to Chris Bell, forecaster at WeatherQuest. Good morning, Chris.
Good morning, Nigel.
Right, first off, terminology. What is the difference between hurricane and a typhoon? Because looking at the television pictures, they seem very similar.
Yeah, there's almost no difference at all. In fact, they're the same thing from a meteorological perspective. Hurricanes happen we name them hurricanes in the Atlantic Ocean and in the Eastern Pacific Ocean. If they're in the Western Pacific Ocean, we call them typhoons, and if they're in the Indian Ocean, they're generally called tropical cyclones.
So this is purely about geography.
It is, yes. They're all different, I should say, from what you might hear someone call a tornado or a twister, which is a much smaller phenomenon that happens underneath a thunderstorm. But these are big, large storms that happen over the tropical oceans of the world that can be hundreds of miles wide.
Okay, right. And we're seeing, as I say, these two storms are really very, very high up our news agenda. In terms of severity, how do these storms rate?
Yeah, well, I mean, so first to start with Florence in the Atlantic, which has now made landfall and is causing all the very heavy rains. The sort of real devastating part of that storm hasn't really been the wind, it's been more the storm surge, so the water that's been pushed from the ocean onto the coastal parts, and then all of the rainfall that's falling after that, which parts of North Carolina and South Carolina have seen 20 to 30 inches of rain, and to put that in perspective, that's about what we get for a whole year in southeastern parts of England, and they've gotten that in just a few days. So you've got all the storm surge, and then you've got all the rain, so obviously that gives a lot of flooding and to places in North Carolina, and risk to life as well.
No, okay. Well, this every single year we have these storms. Are they getting more severe, or is this just the normal pattern we've come to expect?
Yeah, there's a lot of research going on that in the meteorological and climatological communities, and there's no real significant, consensus on it yet, but the kind of findings so far suggest that in actuality these storms may be becoming less frequent, but more severe when they happen. And just to give you a very quick background on why that might be the case is that in a world that's going to warm, the oceans in the northern part of the Atlantic and Pacific Ocean, so the sort of getting closer to the poles, will warm a little bit more than the tropics will, and there'll be less contrast in temperature, and these storms really thrive off of a contrast in the very warm tropics and the cooler air around the poles. And so if there's less contrast, there might be less need for them, but the warmer it is, the stronger they can be. So it's a bit of a complex relationship, really.
Yeah, and of course it's not a given that the world's going to get warmer, is it?
Well, the general consensus from climatologists would suggest it is. So we are headed that way, it looks like. In terms of how quickly that happens and in who warms the most, there's still some question marks, but the very basics in physics would suggest that you're trapping more radiation in the atmosphere, and that will lead to some sort of increase in energy, and that energy is probably going to be manifested in terms of temperature.
And I did see a story that there were some big winds coming to the West Country on Tuesday of this week, and just
that's right.
Quick thought on that.
Yeah, so that's the remnants of ex-Hurricane Helene, which has been out in the Atlantic as well. The remnant low pressure associated with that's going to travel right over Ireland tomorrow afternoon and evening, so Monday afternoon and evening, bringing some gale force winds to southern parts of Ireland and up the Irish coast of Britain, it looks like, as we go through Monday evening and Monday night. So we could see some gusts in order of sort of 60 to 70 miles an hour, and it's going to stay pretty windy in northwest Scotland into the middle of the week as well.
And finally, Chris, Sunday afternoon coming up, and I'm wondering, do I now pack the barbecue away in the garage?
Actually, Nigel, you might enjoy some warmer weather because of this ex-Hurricane Helene that's going up, and so we're looking at temperatures in southeastern parts of England over the next few days into the low to mid-20s, so we could be as high as 25, 26 degrees even, so maybe leave it out this week, and then after that...
Okay, all right, thank you very much indeed. That was Chris Bell, forecaster at WeatherQuest. So there we are, I've learnt something. You know, hurricanes, tropical cyclones, typhoons, and you hear this terminology. I wonder whether, like me, you thought, I wonder what the difference is between them. I've certainly wondered, time and again. The answer is nothing. They're all exactly the same. It's just a question of what geographical part of the world they are in terms of what name they're called. Right, let's get back to uniting the country. Can it be done? Marion is calling from Finchley. Good morning, Marion.
Nigel, I certainly think it can be done. I like the idea of what Mrs. May should say in Salzburg, and Mrs. May could make herself a very great British Prime Minister by chucking Chequers and following the example of her great woman predecessor, Margaret Thatcher, who, when she found the poll tax was so unpopular, chucked that. And Mrs. May could make herself very great by doing that, chucking Chequers.
Yeah, people forget, Marion, actually. They forget that she did chuck the poll tax, didn't she?
Yes.
She did. And in the end, of course, it wasn't the poll tax that brought Margaret Thatcher down. It was divisions over guess what subject? Divisions over Europe, wasn't it, that caused all the difficulty. So you firmly believe then it's not too late for Mrs. May. She can still do this.
I believe it's not, and I think it's a problem for a Prime Minister to change tack completely, but as I say, Margaret Thatcher did it, and she's regarded as a very great Prime Minister, whatever views are taken of her policies. I happen to live in her constituency and met her a number of times, and thought she was a fantastic Prime Minister. I know lots of people take an opposite view, but nevertheless, she got rid of the poll tax when people said, no, we don't want it. And we're all saying, all of us Leavers and quite a lot of Remainers are saying, chuck Chequers.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more, Marion. Chequers must be chucked, and it's not going to get a majority in the House of Commons anyway, in my view. If she sticks with Chequers, it'll be the end of her. But maybe Marion from Finchley is right. If she really, really does, and Mrs. Thatcher did on the poll tax, she could come out of this as a great, popular Prime Minister. The fourth plinth in Trafalgar Square will be Theresa May. Who's to say? You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on RBC, and it's now 11:45. Well, Ian Duncan Smith today says the Prime Minister, all she's got to do, she ditches Chequers, she goes to Salzburg this week, she meets the other heads of all the countries that are going to be there, and she says we're going to go for a Canada-style trade deal. They say, do you know what? Thank goodness, that ends all this nonsense. Let's have a trade deal, and it actually unites the country. I think there's something in it. I think it's got some merit, bringing people together. Decorator Dave here, Nigel. I've popped out for a bit and left your show on for the dog. I think he finds your voice relaxing. Well, there you are. Unity. How about a word of gratitude to the many airmen and pilots from Europe, in particular the Polish squadron, who fought with true heroism in the air and without whom the Battle of Britain may have gone the other way, Ross in Aberdeen. Yes, Ross, absolutely, there were. And not only that, Czech pilots. In fact, I was in Prague last year. I was amazed to see a Spitfire cafe. So I went in, and it was full of memorabilia about Czech Battle of Britain Spitfire pilots. So yes, you're absolutely right. People from all over Europe, and one or two Americans too, Canadians, coming to the UK to help fight against this terrible tyranny that wanted to take over the whole of the rest of Europe. Paul is a new caller from Formby. Good morning, Paul.
Good morning, Mr. Farage.
So, can we unify people, and would a free trade deal be a start?
I think the unifying people needs to be giving the people the idea that Westminster is somehow in control, and perhaps laying out a free trade deal is a way to do it. Mm-hmm. But how would you see that being implemented? Would you see that being implemented in time for March? During the transition period, or how long?
Well, it's fascinating, Paul, isn't it? If you ask a bureaucrat how long it takes to sort a deal out, they'll tell you 10 years. Cameron said it would take 10 years. You ask a businessman or a businesswoman how long it takes to thrash something out, they say, well, I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll sit at this desk and we'll have sandwiches and cups of tea brought in, and we'll sort it out. When there are models like Canada there on the table already, the answer is it can't happen overnight, Paul, but it shouldn't need to take too long.
Well, the Canada model that you mentioned was derived up by bureaucrats, as a free trade deal would be.
Yes.
Because it's not, ironically, it's not countries that trade, it's companies, but the free trade deal is arranged between countries.
You're right.
And that took 10 years.
Yeah, of course. And the longer it takes, the better, because everyone gets paid, it's jobs for the boys, and it's great.
Well, it's not a long... The
difference is, Paul...
about politicians like yourself. Hold on, cynically about
Paul, the difference
like
is...
yourself.
The difference is...
What happens to the companies that are trading in this limbo period?
Yeah, well, the difference...
For example, you mentioned that...
Paul, there wouldn't be a limbo period, because already, right now, we're on exactly the same system as the rest of Europe, and divergence would happen over time. So for us to do this is a very quick thing to do, because there are no disputes about undercutting. There are no disputes about different agricultural methods, because at the minute it's all the same. So the argument that it can be done incredibly quickly, I think, holds true.
So on your point about agricultural methods, and you mentioned that we'd respect each other's standards as part of the free trade deal. So are you then advocating the Canadian model, which is that British farmers should split their fields and their livestock dependent on where they intend to sell them, which is exactly what happens in Canadian farms?
I know it is, and they've also got a very complex agricultural relationship with the USA as well, which Trump has made big play of. Paul, the concept that you organise a free trade deal where of course you have to respect each other's standards and all the rest of it, but you're not in ultimately full regulatory alignment, I think it's something that would deal with some of the biggest criticisms from Remainers, which is their concern about tariff, and maybe that concern's overstated, but there is a concern about tariff, and it would satisfy Leavers in that we would get back control of our borders.
Well, the problem here is that you're advocating this, but you've never implemented policy. So
and who in government has ever implemented policy before? In fact, who in government has ever had a job before? That's the way, I'm afraid, Paul, our system works, isn't it?
Well, no, because the current government, as much as I'm not a particular fan of it, is stuffed with people who've implemented policy. You're getting this idea from IDS. IDS implemented universal credit. Now, you can argue how well that went, but at least he was responsible for it.
Paul, I'm not getting this idea from IDS. I favoured this idea since 1993. I've stood on successive elections arguing for this, but I'm picking up Ian Duncan Smith's comments today and saying, hey, isn't it good that actually there are people who want... I mean, Paul, let me ask you a question. Would you like to see this country more united behind the Brexit process?
I would like to see it more united behind the representative democracy process, which is how this country has.
So you don't respect. So you don't respect the referendum result?
No, actually, as it happens, I do. But then there's a reason. There's only been 3 referendums in the UK's history, right? 2 of which are on the EU, and I'll be impressed if you know what the third was.
Oh, it was the ridiculous proposal to move us onto a voting system that couldn't be explained in a sentence.
There's only been 3, and that is because we have a representative democracy. And when you
one Paul that has failed us and failed us terribly.
So what are you proposing then? That we do everything by referenda?
I tell you what, I like direct democracy. I like the way Switzerland organises itself. I wouldn't want us to have a referendum once a week, but I do think there are times when we, the people, need to have the power to go over and above our elected representatives if they're not doing a proper job. Paul, I'm going to move on. Well, I think, much of today has been dominated, of course, by division. And let's listen again to Sadiq Khan on LBC after the referendum in 2016.
I think the problem for those of us who are saying to the British public there should be a second referendum, it will lead to even more cynicism. It will lead to the British public saying, hold on a sec, these were the rules of the game, we voted in record numbers, and now you're ignoring us.
Yeah, and there he was, and go to lbc.co.uk to remind yourself of that. And then this morning, he's written an article in The Observer, all over the front page, give Britain a new referendum. Here was his response to that.
I accept the verdict of the British public. What I'm not saying is we should have a rerun. What I'm not saying is we should have referendums all the time. What I am saying is, bearing in mind the politicians have failed, the public should take back control and have a say on the outcome of those negotiations.
So it's not a second referendum, it's a fresh referendum. It's a new look. I mean, goodness sake, they must think we were born yesterday. They really, really must. Right, now, let's go. We've got time for one more call. Going to go to Tim, who I've spoken to before, in Evesham in Worcestershire. Good morning, Tim.
Good morning, Nigel. Lovely to speak to you again. I just want to let my father speak to you from the grave. He was a Battle of Britain pilot, shot down, badly burnt, little with shrapnel. My mum was a WAF in the Battle of Britain. The Second World War destroyed his belief in politics, apart from Winston Churchill, obviously. And since the war, since Lord Copthorne, who is our near neighbour, Michael Spicer, an arch Brexiteer and mentor of Daniel Hannan, he lost respect for the politicians. They start wars, they send young people to war. He said before the war, you met a politician, you raised your hat. After the war, you cross the street to go the other side to miss him.
Well, Tim, we talk about respect for politicians. I mean, what Sadiq Khan has done, this dramatic turnabout on the referendum, is the kind of thing that makes people very, very cynical. Do you think, just got a few seconds left, Tim, do you think the country can be united around Brexit?
I think it should be. I've got my doubts as to whether it will be, because there's a split between the young and the old. The young don't have the experience of badness, and what amazes me is why the young on the continent are for getting out of Europe.
I know.
I know.
Tim, in Italy, the old people want to keep things as they are. The young want revolution.
It must be the unemployment and the young on the continent.
It's called the Euro, Tim, and we didn't join it, thank goodness. If we had joined it, the youth in Britain would be against it too. Thank you, everybody. You've been listening to the Nigel Farage Show. I'm back tomorrow evening from 6 o'clock. Coming up at 3. Up next, it's Majid Nawaz.
Thank you, Nigel.
Sorry.
That's all right.
I got lost there.
Nice time, by the way. Coming up.